So the entire purpose of the Cold War globalized order was to pay other countries to be on our side to contain the Soviets. It worked well. So the Soviets have always been leery of American leadership, especially when it comes to economic matters, because they just see it as a ploy to box them in, and they're not entirely wrong. I understand why they're paranoid. Oftentimes, Russian paranoia actually is rooted in a degree of fact, certainly in this case. But this is a country that doesn't have a good internal transport network. All the navigable rivers flow north into the Arctic, not any place where anyone would want to go. And the land is dry and the land is cold. So it's not very productive from an agricultural point of view. So Russia has always needed external investment and external technology in order to make its own system work at anything other than like a serfdom level. That's not really an option, especially when you look at their demographics. And between World War I and World War II and Soviet collectivization and the purges and the forced relocations and the post-Cold War health collapse, Russia had the fastest aging society in the world until Japan passed them up a few years ago. So this is a country that is also on its way out. Now, it doesn't have the economic vulnerabilities that China has. Because the Russians never invested their economy in the global system, when the global system goes away, they're more or less all right. Sure, they will lose resource sales, but militarily, they're in a reasonably good position. The problem is it's not good enough. Because the terrain is so open, Russian history is replete with examples of countries basically rolling in and invading. We know about the Germans. We know about the Swedes, we know about the Chinese, we know about the Persians and the Mongols, but people forget that countries like Canada invaded Russia at one point. I mean, it's not a hard place to get a foothold in. Poland almost conquered Moscow once. So while no one is thinking, oh, I want to march on Moscow right now, the Russians can't take that chance because it's happened so many times before. So if you've got a terminal demography and no real economy, the only thing that you can do to buy yourself more time is take your army while it's still functional and forward position it and plug the geographic gaps that access your lands. So the Carpathians form a border. You anchor there. But that means conquering Ukraine and half of Poland and the Balts. You go south and anchor in the Tianjin, but that means conquering Kazakhstan and the Central Asian republics. So this is something that Russia can do and is working on doing with as much diplomacy and arm twisting as it can. But at the end of the day, they're going to have to use troops. And if they do this, and if it works, then Russia buys itself another 30 years, which honestly is more time than China has. We, courtesy of the Trump administration, got down to fewer than 20,000 troops in the area. And under Biden, we're going to go to 0 by the end of September. So we are close to there. Germany is an interesting place. We all know it, of course, from history, is one of the more warlike places because they're in the middle of everything and they have to be aggressive if they're going to survive. If they wait for someone else to move first, they will always be outnumbered and outgunned and surrounded. But then World War II happened, and they were forcibly reconstructed by the Allies. And so Germany today is neo-pacifist, and their general feeling is if it becomes a military competition, we've already lost. So they want to keep the competition economic and financial so that their larger size, their better geography, their more economically viable firms can dominate. And in the world of the global order, that's a good play. Because if the Americans are outlawing war in Europe and are protecting the Europeans from the Russians and from one another, then the military question isn't even on the table. And in that environment, the Germans have restructured their entire system to maximize benefit. And it's worked very, very well. And that's why Germany is the Germany that we think of, the Germany of industry and exports and manufacturing. But if you remove the Americans from that equation, it all goes to hell. And the only way that Germany continue to exist is by putting the military question back on the table and looking out for its own interests. And the last 11 times that has happened, it has ended badly. France is on the flip side. At the end of World War II, France was the least interested country in what the Americans were offering with the order because, like the United States, they've got a great geography. They've got navigable rivers, fantastic farmland, good local resources, access to the Mediterranean. This is a country that has been a world power for the last several centuries without any help, thank you very much. And then the Americans came in and said, geography doesn't matter. Everyone can play. And in that world, everything that made France special ceased to matter. But now remove the Americans. All of a sudden, geography comes back with a vengeance. And unlike the Germans who retooled everything, the French retooled nothing. So this state-managed economic system that we see as a negative right now in a post-globalized world, that's the way to go in Europe. And they never changed anything. They also happen to have the second most powerful military in all of Europe, the second largest army after Turkey, the second largest navy after the UK. They are no joke. And unlike the United States, when it hits a certain casualty level in its conflicts, it tends to pull back. The French go in hard. They are extraordinarily unapologetic. They're almost American in their foreign policy. And so if you just fast forward a few years, Western Europe is France's playground. And Germany has to find a new way to operate.
Of course, that's what Macron's been trying to do, president of Europe. We've been hopscotching around the world quite a bit, but let's go to India. Is India a winner?
It depends on how you define that word. I don't think India is going to have any kind of the problems like Russia or Germany. Saudi Arabia has long depended upon the United States' largesse, both in terms of oil purchases and military defense, in order to make itself exist. I mean, this is a country that doesn't have an economy outside of the oil markets, and this is a country that doesn't have the military capacity to patrol its own streets, much less its borders. So as the United States pulls back, the Saudis are having an oh crap moment, and they're trying to figure out what to do. So the solution seems to be to stir up as much trouble among as many rivals as possible, so that they're busy putting out fires on their side of the desert borders to Saudi Arabia's north. So Yemen is kind of target practice for their Air Force. They've discovered they're not very good at it. But ISIS is a great example of the sort of institution that the Saudis are creating to cause problems for other countries, so those other countries can't target Saudi Arabia. So ISIS cost them almost nothing, and it stirred up the region for 7 years. Low cost, very effective. They're trying the same thing in Iran, in Chechnya. They tried the same thing with Russia in the past. They're trying the same thing in the Levant, not targeting the Israelis, targeting the groups that are targeting the Israelis. The Israelis and the Saudis get along splendidly, and they think about as highly of everybody else in the region as they think of each other. 5-10 years from now, we're going to probably have a very different opinion about Iran. Now, most of the bad blood between the Americans and the Iranians, of course, dates back to the 1979 revolution and the hostage crisis. Absolutely. But if you look at the 50 years of history before that, we got along pretty well with the Persians because we trusted them more than we trusted the Arabs. Remember that the crown prince of Saudi Arabia right now, this is the guy who sent a hit squad to kill a journalist and then ordered them to cook it to nothing in a brick oven out in a courtyard of the embassy, and then hosted a party for 500 people to destroy the forensic evidence. These are not nice people. And with a little bit of perspective, you have the Saudis throwing terror attacks around the region for a few years, and you have Iran functionally cut out of the oil markets for a few years. The United States is probably going to look at this whole region a little bit differently. I don't mean to suggest that we're going to get back in bed with the Iranians anytime soon, but I think we're going to have a little bit more nuanced view of the region when it comes to Israel versus Saudi Arabia versus Iran than we do right now. And ultimately, the country that has to kind of pick up where we left off and make sense of this, that's Turkey. And they're a country that is very capable of doing that. But just like everybody else in the world, they would rather the Americans do it. And it's not until we're completely gone